There's a particular kind of cold that doesn't bite. It just settles. It moves into your bones like it's signing a lease, and it tells you quietly that it has all the time in the world. I've felt that cold maybe 3 times in my life. The night this story starts was the worst of them, and I wasn't even the one freezing. I want to tell you about a girl who knocked on my door with her knuckles already gone white and blue, who couldn't have been more than 9 years old, and who didn't ask for food, didn't ask for a bed, didn't ask to be saved. She asked for work. "Just give me one chance to work," she said, teeth chattering so hard the words came out in pieces. I'm an old man now, and I've turned a lot of people away in my life. I'm not proud of that, but I'll tell you the God's honest truth before we even begin. I almost said no to her too. I almost closed that door. And the reason I didn't isn't because I'm a good man. It's because of something she did with her hands while she waited for my answer. Something so small I almost missed it. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you're going to understand why a stubborn, lonely rancher who'd given up on everything let a frozen little girl change the entire shape of his life. And why, all these years later, I still leave the porch light on. The knock came at the worst possible hour. Not midnight. Midnight would have been almost respectable. This was that dead, useless stretch around 4 in the morning when even the coyotes have given up, and the world feels like it's been abandoned by whoever was supposed to be running it. I was awake because I'm always awake at 4. Sleep and I had a falling out somewhere around the time I turned 60, and we'd never patched it up. So I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee gone cold in my hands, listening to the wind try to pull the roof off the ranch house, when I heard it. 3 knocks, soft, then nothing. I figured it was a branch. We'd had an ice storm roll through 2 days before, and the cottonwoods were dropping limbs all over the property, snapping under the weight of it. I'd already lost a section of fence on the north pasture, so I sat there and waited for the wind to do it again, prove me right, let me go back to staring at nothing. 3 knocks, softer this time, and under the wind so faint I thought I was imagining it a voice. I'm not a young man. I don't move fast. But something about that sound got me up out of the chair faster than I'd moved in years, because branches don't talk, and out here, 4 in the morning, 20 degrees below freezing, there shouldn't have been a voice at all. I opened the door, and the cold hit me like a fist. And there she was. The first thing I noticed wasn't her face. It was her coat, if you could call it that. A man's jacket, way too big, the kind you'd buy at a thrift store for $2, soaked through and frozen stiff at the hem so it stood out from her body like cardboard. No gloves, no hat, sneakers that had maybe been white once and were now the gray of old snow with one lace missing entirely. Then I looked at her face, and my heart did something painful. She was small, dark hair plastered to her forehead in frozen strings, lips that had gone past pale into a color lips aren't supposed to be. And her eyes were enormous and steady, and looking right up at me with an expression I will never, as long as I live, be able to forget. It wasn't fear. That's what got me. A child standing in the killing cold at 4 in the morning at a stranger's door ought to be afraid, and she wasn't. She looked determined, like she'd rehearsed this. "Mister," she said, and her teeth were going so hard the word rattled. "Just give me one chance to work." I stood there like a fence post. "I can do things," she went on, and she lifted her chin, and I swear to you she was trying to make herself look bigger. "I can carry water. I can feed animals. I'm strong. I don't eat much. Just give me a chance and I'll show you." Now I want you to understand who I was at that point in my life, because it matters. I was a man who had spent the better part of a decade pushing everyone away. My wife, Alina, had passed 4 years before cancer. The slow kind, the kind that gives you plenty of time to memorize exactly what you're losing. After she went, I let the world get smaller and smaller until it was just me and the cattle and a dog named Buck who died the previous spring, and after Buck I didn't even have that. People from town used to come by. The Hendersons, Pastor Mills. They'd bring casseroles and concern, and I'd thank them and stand in the doorway exactly the way I was standing now, making it clear without saying a word that they should leave. Eventually they did. Eventually everybody does if you're cold enough to them for long enough. I'd gotten very, very good at saying no. So that's what I started to do. I felt the word forming. No, honey, you can't be out here. Where are your parents? Let me call somebody. All of it just a longer way of saying no, of making her someone else's problem, of closing the door and going back to my cold coffee and my warm grief. And then she did the thing. While she waited for my answer, while I stood there with the word no sitting in my mouth, she took her two hands, those small blue-white hands with no gloves, and she cupped them together and brought them up to her mouth and breathed into them. Quick, practiced. Then she tucked them right back down at her sides and squared her shoulders again, ready, like she didn't want me to see that she was suffering, like showing the cold might count against her in the job interview. She was trying to hide how much pain she was in, so I wouldn't think she was weak, so I wouldn't say no. I have thought about that small gesture 1,000 times since. A child who has learned, somewhere, somehow, that needing things makes people turn you away. A child who had decided the only thing she could safely offer a stranger was her usefulness. The word no died in my throat. Get in here, I said, and my voice came out rough. Get in here right now. She didn't move at first. She looked at me like she was checking whether I meant it, whether this was a trick, and that look told me more about her short life than any story she could have given me. Then she stepped over the threshold, careful, like she was afraid to take up too much space. I got her to the kitchen, to the chair by the wood stove that I kept burning all night because old men get cold. I threw 2 more logs in even though it didn't need them. I pulled Alina's quilt off the back of the couch, the one I hadn't let anyone touch in 4 years, and I wrapped it around those frozen little shoulders without a second of hesitation, which surprised me more than anything had surprised me in a long while. "What's your name?" I asked, crouching down to her level, my knees popping like gunshots. She hesitated. "Does it matter for the work?" "It matters to me." Another long pause, like she was deciding whether to spend something precious. "Wren," she finally said. "Wren," I nodded slow, "like the bird." Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe that I knew the bird. "My mama said they're small, but they sing the loudest, pound for pound." She said it like a thing she'd memorized and held onto, said, past tense. I caught that and I didn't let my face change. "Well, Wren," I said, "my name's Walt, and before we talk about any work, you're going to drink something hot, because right now your hands are about 30 seconds from frostbite, and I am not going to be the man who let that happen." "I don't need." "I know you don't need anything," I said. "I can see that plain. You're the most self-sufficient 9-year-old I've ever met in my life, but humor an old man. I get lonely talking to myself." I don't know why I said that last part. I'd never admitted it to a single living soul. It just came out looking at her. She studied me for a long moment with those steady eyes, and then, slowly, carefully, like it cost her, she pulled the quilt a little tighter around herself. A small surrender. The first thing she'd let herself accept. I made cocoa. We didn't have any of the fancy kind. I had to do it the way Alina used to, real cocoa powder and sugar and milk on the stovetop, and my hands remembered the motions even though my head had tried hard to forget them. I set the mug in front of Wren and watched her wrap both hands around it and flinch, the warmth hurting the frozen skin before it helped it, and then hold on anyway, eyes closing, like the warmth was the first kind thing that had happened to her in a long time. While she drank, I did the math an old rancher does. No vehicle in the yard, I'd have heard it. The nearest neighbor was 4 miles. The town was 11. The temperature outside was the kind that kills grown men who get caught in it. "Wren," I said gently. "How'd you get here?" "Walked." "From where?" She didn't answer that. She just drank her cocoa and looked at the fire. "Are your folks?" "Can I start working in the morning?" she cut in fast like she was steering away from a cliff edge. "I know I came at a bad time. I'll work extra to make up for it. I just need somewhere I can stay where nobody asks." She stopped herself, bit it off. Where nobody asks questions, that's what she'd almost said. And right there, that was the moment. The morally heavy thing I want to be honest with you about, because this story would be a lie if I pretended I was nothing but kind. Because I understood, sitting in that kitchen, that this child had run away from something. And a good man, a man who followed the rules, picks up the phone right then, calls the sheriff, calls the county, lets the system do what the system does. That's the safe thing, the legal thing, the thing that protects you from any of it landing on your shoulders. And I looked at the way she flinched from questions, the same way she'd flinched from the warmth, and I made a decision I had no right to make. I decided not to call anyone. Not yet. I decided to wait and watch and find out what a 9-year-old girl was running from before I handed her back to whatever it was. I'm still not sure, all these years later, whether that made me a good man or a reckless one. Maybe both. Maybe there's less difference between them than we like to think. "Tell you what," I said. "It's too late to talk about work tonight, or too early. There's a room down the hall, used to be a guest room. Bed's made. You're going to sleep, and in the morning we'll figure out the rest. That's the deal. Take it or leave it." Wren narrowed her eyes. "And then I can work." Lord, this child. "And then," I said, "we'll talk about it." She thought about it, weighted on whatever scale she carried around inside her. Then she nodded once, all business, and stuck out one small, still cold hand for me to shake, like we were closing a deal between equals. I took it. It was the size of a sparrow in my palm. "Deal," I said. She slept 14 hours. I checked on her maybe 6 times through that first day, easing the door open just enough to see the shape of her under the blankets, the slow rise and fall of her breathing. Every time, I half expected her to be gone out the window, vanished. The whole night nothing but a dream brought on by too much grief and not enough sleep. But she stayed. Dead to the world, one arm flung out, her face finally loose and young the way a sleeping child's face should be. While she slept, I did 2 things. The first was I went out and did the chores, and I noticed, God help me, that I did them lighter than I had in years. There was someone in the house. The thought kept surfacing like a cork I couldn't hold under. There's someone in the house. It changed the weight of the cold, the length of the work. I caught myself thinking, I should fix that broken latch on the chicken run before she sees it and thinks I keep a sloppy operation. Caught myself and laughed out loud, alone in the barn, at the strangeness of caring what a runaway thought of my fences. The second thing I did was I went into Wren's room while she slept, and I gently lifted the man's jacket from where she'd dropped it by the bed. I told myself I was going to dry it by the stove. That was half true. The other half was I wanted to know who she was. There was nothing in the pockets but a single item, and when I drew it out, I had to sit down on the edge of the hall floor and breathe for a minute. It was a photograph, worn soft and pale from handling, folded and unfolded so many times the crease had gone white and was starting to tear through. A woman, young, dark-haired, Wren's mother, no question, same eyes, same stubborn chin. She was laughing at whoever held the camera, and on her hip was a baby, and behind them was a hospital. The kind of hospital with a name you don't say out loud in front of children. On the back, in pencil gone faint, Mama and Wren, be brave, little bird. I sat in that hallway holding a stranger's whole heart in my 2 hands, and I understood that whatever this girl had walked out of the dark to escape, it was bigger and sadder than anything I'd been brave enough to imagine. I dried her jacket. I put the photograph back exactly where I'd found it. And I started, for the first time in 4 years, to think about somebody other than myself. She woke up swinging not fists but words. I was in the kitchen when I heard the bedroom door, and by the time I turned around she was standing in the hallway fully dressed, jacket on, sneakers on, that frozen stiff coat now dry and soft, and her face was set in that same determined line from the doorstep. "I overslept," she said, like a confession, like a crime. "You should have woke me. I'll make it up. Show me what needs doing." "Ren, I'm not lazy." Her voice cracked on it just slightly. "I'm not. The sleep got me. It won't happen again." And I realized that in whatever life she'd come from, sleeping was a thing you apologized for. That rest was a luxury she'd been taught she hadn't earned. I felt that old cold settle into my own bones, the bad kind, the least signing kind. "Come eat first," I said. "After, I'll work first then." "Ren," I said it quiet, but I let it land. "In this house we eat first. That's not me being soft, that's a rule. You can't carry water on an empty stomach in this cold. You'll go down in the yard and then I'll have to carry you, and I've got a bad back. So sit, eat, then work. Deal." She loved the word deal. I'd figured that out. Frame everything as a contract between equals and she could accept it. Frame it as charity and she'd bolt. So I gave her deals. All day long deals. She sat. She ate eggs and bacon and 3 pieces of toast, and she ate them fast and a little furtive, an arm half curled around the plate the way you eat when you've had to protect your food before. I pretended not to see it. I drank my coffee and talked about nothing, the weather, the cattle, the price of feed, giving her quiet to eat in, the way you talk soft around a horse that's been beaten. Then I put her to work, because she'd earned it the only way she'd let herself be helped, by trading for it. I want to tell you that first day of work because it's the day I started loving her, though I wouldn't have used that word then. Wouldn't have dared. I gave her the easy chores, the chickens, the barn cats, filling the water troughs from the heated tank so the cattle didn't have to break ice all day. And here is the thing about Wren that broke me open a little more with every hour. She was good at it. Not because she was strong, she was a wisp of a thing. She had to fill the water bucket halfway and make 2 trips where I'd make 1. She was good at it because she paid attention. She watched how I latched a gate, and then she latched every gate that way for the rest of her life. She noticed the brown hen got bullied off the feed and started scattering a second handful around the side of the coop just for her, without being told, because she'd seen it and she'd thought about it. She found the broken latch on the chicken run, the one I'd been embarrassed about, and she didn't say a word about it being broken. She just propped it shut with a rock she'd carried over special, and when I noticed, she got nervous, like she'd overstepped. "That's a good fix," I told her, "better than what I'd have done." She looked at the rock, looked at me, and something in her face, some little hinge, loosened. "Really? Really, you see things, Wren. That's worth more than strong out here. Strong I can hire, seeing things you can't teach." She didn't smile, but she stood up a little straighter, and for the rest of the afternoon I caught her looking for more things to see, more problems to spot, like I'd handed her a key to something. That night over dinner she ate slower this time, the arm not curled so tight. I asked her, gentle as I could, "Wren, the work's good. You're a good worker, I mean that. But you know you don't have to work to stay here, right? You could just stay, be a kid. I've got plenty of room." It was the wrong thing to say. I watched her shut like a barn door in wind. "No," she said. "That's not no, I work. That's the deal. I work or I go. I'm not gonna be somebody's. I'm not gonna be a thing people take care of and then get tired of." And she stopped, pushed her plate away. The arm came back, curled tight. And there it was, the shape of the thing she'd run from, showing through like a body under a sheet. Somebody had taken care of her once and gotten tired of her. Or worse, somebody had made her feel that being cared for came with a bill at the end, one she could never pay, one that made her a burden, a problem, a thing. I didn't push. I'd learned that much in 2 days. I just said, "Okay, the deal stands. You work, you stay, as long as you want." And then, because I couldn't help it, "But for what it's worth, Wren, I don't get tired of people who see broken latches and fix them with rocks. That's a rare quality. I'd be a fool to get tired of that." She didn't answer, but she pulled her plate back. The days became a shape, a good shape. She'd be up before me, which meant she was up at an hour that frankly worried me. But I let it go because I understood she needed to be the one giving, always the one giving, never caught taking. So I started forgetting to do things on purpose, leaving the cocoa powder out where she'd find it and make herself a cup, so it'd feel like she was using something rather than being given something. Leaving a pair of Alina's old work gloves too big, but I cut down the fingers and stitched them badly, my hands clumsy at it, lying around near her chores. So she'd think she found them rather than that I'd made them for her at the kitchen table at midnight, squinting, pricking my fingers, cursing. She found the gloves, put them on, held her hands up and turned them over and looked at the crooked seams where I'd taken them in, and I knew she knew. Nobody leaves gloves lying around already sized for a child's hands. She wasn't a fool. She looked at me across the yard. I pretended to be very interested in a fence post. She didn't say thank you. She knew I'd built her a world where she didn't have to. But that evening, when she thought I was asleep, I heard her in the kitchen, and in the morning every one of my own work gloves had been oiled and softened and laid out in a neat row by the door. Repaying a gift she wasn't supposed to know she'd been given, with a gift she'd make me pretend I didn't notice. That's how we talked, Wren and I, in gloves and rocks and second handfuls of feed. Two people who'd both learned the hard way that saying it out loud could get it taken from you. The reckoning came 3 weeks in, on a Tuesday, with a knock on the door, and this time it was the kind I'd been dreading. A county sheriff's vehicle in the yard. A woman in a heavy coat with a badge and a clipboard and a careful, professional face. And I knew, the second I saw her, that the thing I'd decided not to do, call someone, do it right, had been decided for me. Word gets around, out here. The Henderson's boy had seen a little girl in my yard and mentioned it to his mama, and his mama had mentioned it to somebody, and the somebody had a job that involved clipboards. Wren was in the barn. She hadn't seen the vehicle yet. "Mr. Walter Cassidy," the woman said, "I'm with County Child Services. I understand you may have a minor staying on your property. Here's the morally heavy decision I promised you, the big one, the one I still turn over at night." Because I had about 4 seconds to choose. I could tell the truth. Yes, there's a girl, I don't know where she came from, take her, she's your problem now. I followed the rules. Safe, clean, legal, the thing a sensible old man does. Or I could lie to a county official with a badge and take on God knew what kind of trouble, for a child who wasn't mine, who I'd known 3 weeks, who I had no right to and no claim on at all. I thought about the photograph, "Be brave, little bird." I thought about a pair of frozen hands cupped to a mouth, so a stranger wouldn't see her suffering. "There's a girl," I heard myself say, "my great niece, Wren, she's staying with me a while. Her mama passed and her daddy's not in the picture. Family arrangement. I've got papers coming." Every word a lie, smooth as you like. I hadn't lied that well since I was young enough to need to. The woman looked at me, looked at her clipboard. We had a report of a runaway minor matching her description, from over in the next county. Girl named Wren Holloway ran off from a placement 3-4 weeks back. A placement, foster care. So that was it. That was the thing with the bill at the end. A child passed hand to hand to hand, taken care of and gotten tired of, exactly as many times as it takes to teach a 9-year-old that the only safe way to be wanted is to be useful. "Don't know anything about that," I said. "My Wren's been with me near a month. You're welcome to come back when my lawyers got the papers in order. Till then, I'd ask you to respect that there's a grieving child in that barn who's just starting to feel safe, and I'd take it kindly if you didn't go scaring her." I have no idea where the words came from. I've been a quiet man for 4 years, but I planted my feet on that porch the same way I'd planted them to push the whole world away, except this time I was planting them to keep one small piece of it in. The woman studied me a long, long moment. And then, I'll never know exactly why, maybe she'd seen enough placements go wrong. Maybe something in my face told her the truth that mattered even though my words were all lies. She clicked her pen shut. "I'll need those papers, Mr. Cassidy," she said. "Real ones. There's a process. It's not fast and it's not easy and it's not cheap, and a man your age on your own, they don't make it simple. You understand what you're signing up for?" "I understand," I said. I didn't, not the half of it, but I understood the only part that counted. She got in her vehicle. Before she pulled out, she rolled the window down. "For what it's worth," she said, "the placement she ran from, it wasn't a good one. There's a file. I'd start with a lawyer named Dell in town. He does this kind of thing cheap for the right reasons." And she drove off. I turned around, and Wren was standing in the barn door. She'd heard, maybe not all of it. Enough. Enough to know a clipboard had come for her, and enough to know I'd stood on the porch and made it leave. She didn't run to me. We weren't those people. But she walked over slow, and she stood next to me looking at the dust settling in the yard where the vehicle had been. And after a while she said, in a very small voice that had nothing of the determined worker in it at all, "You said great niece." "I did." "That's a lie." "It is." She was quiet then. "Why?" And I looked down at this child who had taught herself that she had to earn the very air she breathed, and I said the truest thing I have ever said in my life. "Because some things you don't make a deal for, Wren. Some things you just decide, and I've decided." She cried then. First time I ever saw it. Not pretty crying, the ugly, gulping, years of it kind, the kind that's been waiting a long time for somewhere safe to come out. And she let me put my arm around her shoulders, and she didn't curl away, and we stood in the cold yard until the both of us couldn't feel our feet. The papers took 11 months. I'm going to be honest with you, because this story has been honest so far, and I won't cheapen it at the end. Those 11 months were the hardest of my life, harder than the cold night she arrived, harder in some ways than losing Alina, because losing Alina was a thing that happened to me, and this was a thing I had to fight for over and over, against a system that looked at a lonely old rancher and a traumatized girl, and saw a problem to be managed instead of a family to be allowed. The lawyer Dell was as good as the woman had said. He took it cheap and he took it serious, and he warned me up front. "They're going to ask you questions you won't like, Walt. They're going to look into Alina, into why you're alone, into whether an old man grieving his wife is doing this for the child or for himself, and you'd best have an honest answer because they'll smell it if you don't." It was a fair question. It was, in fact, the question, because in those first weeks hadn't I thought it myself? There's someone in the house. Hadn't the lightness in my chores been at least a little bit about my own loneliness lifting? Was I saving her, or was she saving me, and did the difference matter, and if it didn't matter to me, would it matter to a judge? I sat with that for a long time, and the answer I finally brought into that courtroom was the only one I had. "I don't know if I started this for her or for me," I told the judge, an old woman with reading glasses and tired eyes. "Honest answer, Your Honor, I think it was tangled up. I was a lonely man and she was a lost girl, and maybe we needed each other, and maybe that's a selfish reason. But I'll tell you what I know now, 11 months in. I know that child fixes broken latches with rocks. I know she gives the bullet hen a second handful of feed where nobody can see. I know she's never once asked me for a single thing for herself, and that's not strength, Your Honor, that's a wound. And I have spent 11 months trying to teach her that she's allowed to need things, and we are not done yet. If you send her somewhere else, she'll go back to thinking love comes with a bill, and I can't." My voice went then. First time in a courtroom I'd ever heard a man's voice just give out. "I can't let her go back to thinking that. Started for me or not, I can't." The judge took her glasses off, looked at Wren, who was sitting beside Dell in a dress we'd bought special, her hands folded in her lap, her chin up, doing that thing where she made herself look bigger. "Young lady," the judge said, "do you want to live with Mr. Cassidy?" And Wren, my Wren, who had walked 4 miles through killing cold rather than ask anyone for anything, who had offered a stranger her usefulness because she thought it was all she was worth. Wren looked at the judge, and then she looked at me, and she did the bravest thing I ever saw her do. She asked for something. Yes, she said, clear, no deal attached, no work offered in trade, just the naked one of it held out in the open where anyone could have taken it from her. I want to stay, please, I want to stay with Walt. Please, she'd never once said please for herself, not in 11 months. I lost it right there in the courtroom. So did Dell, a little, and he'd done 100 of these. The judge put her glasses back on fast, the way people do when they don't want you to see. We got the papers. That was a long time ago now. I'm telling you this from the same kitchen, the same chair by the same wood stove, though the stove's been rebuilt twice, and I'm a good deal older and slower than the man who opened that door. Wren grew up. She grew up fierce and watchful and kind in that quiet, rock-under-the-latch way she never lost. She ran this ranch better than I ever did by the time she was 16. She went off to college, fought me about it, didn't want to leave me alone, and I had to do the hardest thing a parent does, which is to lie and say I'd be fine without her so she'd go live her life. She studied veterinary medicine. Of course she did. The girl who scattered a second handful of feed for the hen nobody else fed. She's a grown woman now, with a practice 2 towns over and a family of her own. She comes by every Sunday. She still oils my gloves and lays them out by the door, and I still pretend not to notice, and we still talk in that language only the two of us speak. And here's the thing I think about, the thing I started this whole story to get to. People always say I saved her. The folks in town, when the story got around, Walt Cassidy took in that runaway girl, can you imagine, raised her like his own. They say it like I was the rancher and she was the rescue. But I want you to remember how I told you it began. I told you I almost said no. I told you I was a cold man who'd gotten very good at closing doors, a man who'd let his whole world shrink down to nothing because it was easier than the work of staying open. I was 4 years into dying slow, the way you can die without your heart ever stopping. And a frozen little girl walked 4 miles through the dark and knocked on my door and offered me the only thing she thought she had, her work, her usefulness, her 2 cupped hands breathing warmth she was too proud to let me see her need. She didn't ask me to save her. She asked me to give her a chance. And in giving her one, God is my witness, she gave me mine. She asked me last Sunday why I always leave the porch light on. Every night, all night, has done for years. Costs a fortune in bulbs. She's been after me about it since she was a teenager. I never told her the real reason. I told her it was for the moths, or for finding the steps in the dark, or some old man's foolishness. But the truth is this. Somewhere out there, tonight, in cold like the cold that brought her to me, there's another child walking 4 miles through the dark, certain that the only way anybody will let them in is if they're useful, breathing into their own small hands so nobody sees them suffer.